Good morning, and thank you, Les. I love Christmas time. This past Thursday we got to celebrate with our annual candlelight service and carol sing. There's something wonderful about celebrating the birth of Jesus in word and song, the classics of the carols, and sometimes a few newly discovered Christmas songs. And it can be hilarious because the kids get the words wrong so many times. One of the funniest for me is the 12 Days of Christmas. Everyone is just locked on for the first 5 days. And then nobody knows. You get to 10 and you're looking at one another and you're mumbling and you hear someone's like, 10 goats a bleeding, 9 fishers fishing, 5 golden rings. And everyone loses their mind. They're all connected. I can't help laugh at the thought of it. But what most of us don't know is that the 12 Days of Christmas, that song, actually starts on December the 25th and ends on January the 5th. And it's traditionally called Christmas Tide. And so Christmas time runs November, late November-ish to usually December 25th. And then Christmas Tide runs from December 25th to January 5th. It's a time where we celebrate the birth of Jesus, where Advent is a preparation for the birth of Jesus. And so we're asked to reflect on the significance of God's message that Jesus is born. God is with us. And so we spend the bulk of Christmas Tide, that week between Christmas Eve and New Year's Day, hopefully reflecting on what does life look like with God's favor and peace upon us. And people historically tend to think, what do I want to do to improve my life? What can I do with my life as a reflection of God's presence in it? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a resolution. Now, if you're like most people, it may be quickly as forgotten as the words for the 12 Days of Christmas are, but don't despair. As we celebrate Christmas Tide, I invite you to join with me to look at the journey of the Magi in Matthew chapter 2. So, Matthew chapter 2, the journey of the Magi, the Christmas story, is unusual because unlike most of the stories in the Gospels, the focus isn't on Jesus. It's actually probably one of the few gospel stories where Jesus isn't the central figure. It focuses more on the where and the interactions between Herod the Great and this group called the Magi. But that doesn't mean it has nothing relevant to say. It doesn't mean it doesn't teach us anything. The story of the Magi's visit to the Christ child highlights not only their journey from far away and to Jerusalem and then Bethlehem, but back home. And it incorporates the story of the Holy Family, married Jesus and Joseph, fleeing from Bethlehem to Egypt and eventually returning. And so in a very real way, it also highlights something far more important than geographical movement. It highlights a personal response to Jesus. And so the promise that God has come near, Emmanuel, and the angels praise, peace on earth and goodwill to man. It drives us back to this question, what did they do with this person, Jesus? How did the Magi and Herod respond? So let's start with what we already know. If you look at the text, we're going to walk through a few things that they knew, and then we're going to kind of explore the text and kind of highlight some of these interesting differences between Herod and the Magi. So first off, they both knew that fools don't rely on others' wisdom. They knew to receive input from other people. The Magi saw the star in the east, came to Jerusalem, and they said, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star when it rose and have come to worship him." So they knew that they didn't have all the answers. In this case, they relied on stars and dreams in this story. If we look at how Herod responds, he goes to the scribes and the teachers of the law. So in verse 3, it says, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. He assembled the chief priests and scribes of the people, and he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they told him. So they both knew not to rely on just their own perspective. How else are they similar? Well, they both knew that he was from David's line. He was the king. He was the promised one of Israel. And as we explore a little further down, closer to the end, you'll see this. They both knew how old Jesus was. What most of us don't realize, when we tell our Christmas stories, we have this almost miraculous conjunction of events that the shepherds, the angels, the Magi all kind of congregate on the stable at the same time, and everyone arrives within a couple of minutes with the little drummer boy and everybody. And it's this mad place, and, I really don't know what the drummer boy was thinking. Mary just gets the baby Jesus to sleep, and she's exhausted, and this kid comes along and says, I know what she needs, a drum solo. Not such a good call. But we have this picture of all this crowded stable with this huge audience. But that's not what the text tells us. What the text tells us is that the Magi left when Jesus was born. They didn't arrive when he was born. And so we'll come back to how do we know that as we get a little later in the text. So let's continue through our journey in the text. So let's highlight this comparison contrast between the Magi and Herod. So the Magi were wise men, people of esteemed spiritual faith, and they were also rulers. They were from the east, which suggests that they were not under Roman rule, not politically affiliated. Herod was under Roman, a representative of Roman rule. He was of the Bedouin tribes. He was a Jew by training and a Greek by culture. So he was a bit of a cultural mutt. But the interesting thing is, what most of us miss is that Herod and the Magi are very similar creatures. They're both rulers. They're both religiously connected to Judaism. They're both Greek in culture. And the difference is their political affiliation. So when they stand across the table from each other, they are staring at an equal. They are both kings, in a sense. And so the Magi come to him and they say, verse 2, where is he that was born King of the Jews? We saw his star, we've come to worship him. They knew he was more than just a human ruler. And so they come open with honesty. We saw the star, and when it rose, we've come to worship him. And I love foreboding. A good story always has that element of seeing the end from the beginning. It has that element of something's going on here. What is it? And as Les shared during communion, his birth foretold of a death. And so Herod's response here has this dark foreboding element. They come to say, we come to revere, we come to worship him, we come to recognize who he is. To which the text says, when Herod heard this, he was troubled. And that's not the foreboding part. The foreboding part is the next phrase, and all Jerusalem with him. Dangerous people have a gravity of emotion. When they are troubled, everyone is scared. Herod was the kind of dangerous figure that when he was not at peace, no one could sleep at night. He was dangerous. All of Jerusalem was troubled with him. It was this, you could feel the palpable tension, the fear, the worry of what is this madman going to do next? Because in a very real way, we'll see that Herod was the villain in every way. So how else did he respond? Where the Magi responded with honesty, he gathers them and he harvests the knowledge from the source of wisdom in his life. And then he summons the wise men, verse 7, secretly and learns from them when the star appeared. File that one away. We're going to come back to that. what time the star appeared. See, so he didn't turn to his wise men and say, "Hey guys, these Magi tell us that the king was born. Can you do some research and help us figure it out?" He hears from the Magi, sends them away, calls up his specialists, gets the information from them. Then he secretly grabs the Magi and says, "So, when did this star appear?" And so he's kind of brokering information, which is a classic tactic. But unfortunately, Herod didn't really have a good motive here. He opens with lies. He sends them to Bethlehem, and he goes and he says, "Go, search diligently for the child. And when you've found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." Herod knew who he was talking to, and he didn't mind lying. After listening to the king, they went their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. Another mark of the wise. And going into the house, they saw the child. Not the newborn, not the baby in a manger. They saw the child, the capable of walking one. The paidion, where we get our word pediatric, with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. They came and fulfilled their purpose in coming. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Another mark of a wise person is generosity. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. They were willing to surrender their own ideas. They were willing to submit to others. Can you imagine? In that time and culture, a king, a ruler, willingly submitting to a dream, to a baby. There's an immense humility there. There is an openness to change. Again, two more marks of a wise person. So when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared, verse 13, to Joseph in a dream and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." And so that troubled text now erupts into anger. And so Joseph rose and took the child and his mother by night, and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken of the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." Now here's the interesting thing. The Magi didn't lie to Herod. They didn't do anything to trick him. But in verse 16 it says, "Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men," or maybe better phrased, when he had been outsmarted or outmaneuvered by the wise men, he became furious. And he sent and he killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in that region who were 2 years and under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Sorry, when did that star appear again? Oh, about 2 years ago. Okay, 2 years ago. Got it. See, right from the beginning, this troubling of Herod now starts to unfold. His intent all along was to be murderous, was to control, was to resist, was to be in power. Power is a drug. It's dangerous. And so it says it closes the story that says, "Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in loud lamentation. Rachel, weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted because they are no more." One other observation about the wise men and Herod. As the wise men go through their journey, their interactions with people are mostly positive, and they tend to gather people around them. They are part of a community of faith, a community of worship, a community of belonging, a community of wisdom and receptiveness, being able to question themselves and to receive more wisdom than what they have. And yet the picture of Herod is that he's alone in his palace, in this position of power, with no relationships, with no depth, no connection. And so when we look at the Magi, lives defined by joy and honesty, reverence and worship, generosity, surrender, humility, openness to change, and community. And we look at Herod, troubled, secretive, deceptive, hostile, angry, murderous, and isolated. We're presented a picture of the best and worst of humanity, the best of what we can be and the worst of what we can be. And we're presented with the choice between being a Herod and being a Magi. Because both of them overflowed into those around them. When Herod was troubled, everyone was troubled. The Magi were at peace. The whole Holy Family was at peace. And so the question is, what did they do with this Christ child? Herod came to a place to resist. Herod felt threatened by what Jesus represented, by what he would one day become, and it was already. The Magi rejoiced and delighted. Because here's the thing. What does it mean to be wise? Does wise mean being right all the time? Well, clearly not. They went to Jerusalem when they should have gone to Bethlehem. Does it mean knowing everything? No. It doesn't even mean knowing how to get the right answers, because they never once stopped to ask the scribes or the experts on the scriptures. Does being wise make you immune to deception? No. They were tricked by flattery and a smooth talker. And don't get me wrong, Herod was a very smooth talker. See, the scriptures tell us that the beginning of wisdom is to fear the Lord, is to know rightly who God is and who you are. That's the beginning of wisdom. And the Mishnah, the Jewish teaching, says that the second part of wisdom is to depart from evil. To know God and to know yourself puts you in a place to depart from evil. And so in a very real way, we have a wise man, we have a fool. And the Proverbs warn us about what power in the hands of a fool looks like. But I propose to you that knowing wisdom is knowing that you have a lot to learn, and developing in yourself the ability to listen and discern what other people have to say. Not always being sure that you're right, but being willing to question it. And so, how do we apply this to our lives? I think there's already some obvious inroads. But this year I want to challenge you to make a resolution that isn't forgotten as quickly as the 12 Days of Christmas's lyrics, or that song that nobody knows the words to. Yeah, I don't know the words at all. Let's go for something with a little more depth. This year, let's make the choice, the resolution to live in light of the Christmas story. God is with us. What does that look like? What does it look like for life to be lived with God's favor and peace upon us? Will you be a Magi? And will you grow more into that? Or will you choose to grow more into a Herod? What will you do with the person of Jesus? Because either way, it will overflow into the lives of those around you. This year, make the choice for something that you will remember, that will be worth remembering. Be like the Magi. Because the wise still seek him. And if you're not sure where to begin with that, we have home churches in our community, places where personal growth most frequently happens. It is the place for connecting with God and others. Community is one of the first keys of wisdom, of health. So, first, act in joy. Celebrate what God has done in your life. Second, humility. Join a home church where you can connect, be known, and to know others. And have your ideas rub up against theirs because, to be honest, it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how learned you are. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are. It doesn't matter how clever you are. You're probably wrong somewhere. And so we also recognize the importance of honesty and generosity in that. So as you make your choice, I want to urge you, seek him, just like the Magi. It doesn't mean having all the answers. It means coming face to face with him who is the answer. So for Christmastide, over the next week, contemplate your resolution. How do you want to be more wise? Not in your eyes, but in the eyes of him who gives wisdom freely. It says in James that God is generous to all. Any who would ask wisdom, he gives it freely. And so my prayer for you is that this year would be a year where you grow and abound in grace and wisdom and peace and the presence of God. Let it begin today as we move forward into the new year, as we celebrate Christmastide. And as always, go in grace.